But also being general funds, we want to make sure that in any case possible we can maximize the federal state partnership that we have through Medicaid. So often when questions or requests come in, we may come back with questions about what other funding sources have been tried. Has Medicaid been tapped for the need? And those questions are really just so that we can ensure that we're doing our fiscal responsibility and utilizing those federal dollars in any case that we are able to do that. So just some definitions on, moving on to the next slide. Thank you, John. Some definitions that are important when we're talking about extraordinary needs funding. The first one is at risk. So we would consider an at-risk participant to be a person who's in jeopardy of losing their current services due to either behavioral problems or medical concerns. But really, any concern that would come up that would put that person at risk of losing their services is something that we would consider as an ENF request. A crisis is any event that does or is expected to lead to an unstable or dangerous situation that would impact the community support provider's ability to continue providing services to that participant. Behavior needs are the way in which a participant acts, resulting in serious health and welfare concerns, and that would then cause the participant to be considered at risk. Special medical needs, really if there are significant medical conditions, that person could be considered at risk if those medical conditions or the things that that individual needs to address those medical conditions are not something that would be covered by Medicaid or through the waiver or through Medicare if the person does have Medicare. Temporary additional needs, these would be changes that are lasting less than 3 months. So if the person has a change in their situation and it's expected to last less than 3 months and it costs more than $150 to provide the services needed to meet that additional change in need. Urgent would be defined as additional needs of a sudden nature or an emergency that could not have been reasonably predicted. So either there's a medical condition or a behavioral need that comes up that was, unexpected, that could not have been predicted by either the agency or their team. And then short term, again, is a maximum of 3 months. So now John's going to move on to some of the criteria and the process of requesting ENF dollars.
Yep, thanks, Ann. So when thinking about filling out funding for ENF, some things to keep in mind are when you're filling out, the request must be individualized. So if there is something going on for more than one person, there needs to be an ENF requested for each individual person. Request should be submitted immediately after identifying the need. So for example, somebody needs to travel out of state, they need some staff support, you may be requesting some assistance to cover those hours, whatever that case may be. That should be submitted prior to the appointment as opposed to after. It allows us the opportunity to ask any additional questions, those kinds of things, and then delays you guys receiving the payment in a timely manner. All other resources must be exhausted. As Ann indicated, these funds are short-term, so if it's something that's going to be long-term, has there been conversation with the team? Has the team met with conversation with the conflict-free case manager to discuss is a significant change in order? That one way to handle the anticipated additional needs if they're for a longer term. Are there community resources available? Depending on the person's age, are there other things out there that the agency can tap into? Are there agency foundations? Just a wide variety of things. Is it something that should be covered by Medicaid? durable medical equipment, those kinds of things. Typically, Medicaid will cover the cost of those.
Is it something that the person could develop a payment plan and so they can use their own personal resources over a period of months rather than in a one lump sum?
Yeah, exactly.
Those kinds of things.
Right. Yeah, and personal resources is another really great example. Is a person able to cost share a portion of what is being requested, those kinds of things. Again, funding is a short-term intervention. If it's something that's going to be needed for longer than 3 months, that significant change request process should be utilized instead. In-state resources must be utilized prior to accessing out-of-state resources. And as Ann mentioned, these are general fund dollars. We have a limited budget for these, so expenditures should be of a minimal cost. ENF is used to stabilize a participant who is at risk. Again, we use the term at risk instead of crisis. When that person hits a crisis mode, it's likely beyond some of these short-term interventions. And then requests for additional information need to be submitted within 30 days of the request. As a team, as we're looking at it, we may come up with a list of questions which we'll take back to your program specialist that you work with, who will contact you to have that additional conversation, be it phone, email. Those need to come in within 30 days. If they don't, the request will end up being denied, and then we'll need to start over from the beginning. So what does the process look like? So the ENF requests need to come from the community support providers. Certainly can work in conjunction with a conflict-free case manager if they're the ones who identify a potential need, somebody on the team, that sort of thing. But the ENF request needs to come from the CSP. So they complete the form in its entirety, and we're going to break down the form over the next few slides. The ENF request form needs to be signed by the director or their designee of the community support provider. Once it's received here, the program specialist will go through our internal process, which then, when that's completed, it comes to the ENF team, and we'll take a look at it, approve, deny, or potentially request additional information within a 2-week time period. If it is approved, then the community support provider community training services contract will be amended, and then the CSP is responsible for submitting the 103 form, request for payment for the actual expenditures incurred up to but not exceeding the approved amount. And when thinking about this, it is okay for a CSP to submit more than one request for payment form for an ENF as things are taking place. If it's a multi-step kind of process for the ENF, as expenses are incurred, you certainly can submit those requests for payment forms as those things take place. You don't have to wait until the final end to submit those. So the DHS-DD 101 form, or this is the ENF request form. What is the purpose of the ENF request form? What we're looking for here is kind of what is your proposed plan? What will the ENF request provide to the person? What's the desired outcome? How long is it expected to be needed? And what is the total dollar amount being requested by the provider to support the participant? The next section this is a new portion of the ENF request form. Has a participant and their team met, including the conflict-free case manager, to discuss the need. Really just looking for information there as to how it's come to be that the ENF is being requested, and has conflict-free case manager been consulted as well in relation to the request. What have you tried? This is a really great place to indicate the other community resources that you've potentially tapped into. Again, did you run it through Medicaid, get the denial, those kinds of things. What other things have you tried? So have there been significant events in the person's life? What did you do to support the person? What has been tried to help the person to find different avenues in their life, if it's related to a behavioral ENF, those kinds of things. Were there new environments that were tried if you're looking for something environmental for the home? Were there changes made, those kinds of things. So really just looking at providing us with an explanation of what it is that you've tried to do to help support the person. And then what was your learning based on what you've tried? Did you try additional supports, and what did you learn from those? What did the team learn regarding day services, environmental changes, those kinds of things? Then what are you pleased about based on what you tried and what you learned? What success has a person had? Maybe not full success in an area, but maybe partial successes, those kinds of things. Is there anything specific that the team is pleased with in regards to the service and support areas that the funding is being requested for? What are you concerned about? So based on what you've tried and what you've learned in the past year, what challenges or obstacles may still be there? Again, in regards to that environmental area, so you've tried some new things, but here's what we learned, what we're pleased about, but these are concerns that we still have with those. What does the participant think, through all of these areas as well? What are some changes that they may want or they may identify? Based on what you've learned, what will you try? Is there anything that should have been done differently, could have been done differently? How will the expenses be covered long term? How will the plan be changed or revised? Those kinds of things. So it's really that person-centered thinking. That 4+1 is what we're going for there, and really just providing us with that information as to what you've tried with the person, how you've helped support them through the process, and really what is the funding going to help with going forward. And then a spot for the director of the community support provider or their designee to sign along with the address. And I will turn it back over to Ann for, there are times when we may request some follow-up from an ENF once it's been approved and completed.
Right. So if we do determine that we will fund the ENF request, there are cases where we may decide that follow-up is necessary after that's been approved. Generally, that would be a conversation with the program specialist here at our division. And then the program specialist would be responsible for that follow-up. It would likely take the form of a phone call with the CSP, or maybe if the program specialist was on site for another purpose, there would be a conversation at that time. It would really, be a conversation including discussion about what worked and what did not work, any learning that occurred as a result of the ENF, the person's progress, a report on the person's progress and status, and then how the CSP will identify and support continued progress for the individual. So we certainly don't do this for every ENF request. Likely this would be a situation where we either felt like we needed to kind of have follow-up on the individual and their progress, or maybe there was a ENF request that was a little out of the box thinking and we wanted to be aware of kind of what the results were so that we could share it as best practice with other CSPs. We also just wanted to close with just some information about the distinction between the ENF requests that we've been discussing today and the year-end ENF. As you all know, we do typically at the end of each fiscal year, if we do have funds available, we will send out CSPs a request to submit year-end ENF requests. Those are not included in the process that John walked through today. And so in the extent that we would have funding, or in the event, that we would have funding available at the year end, our office would contact CSPs. We would ask you to complete an Excel spreadsheet provided by our office, and then we would review those and prioritize the ENF request. And then again, we would have the CSPs notified, and we would amend those CTS contracts. So really the point of that slide was just to, again, clarify that there are two different processes, and not to consider the ENF process that we discussed today in the year-end process. So I think we would open it up to questions, and if anybody has any comments or questions, we would be happy to chat about them. All right, it doesn't sound like we have any questions. It doesn't look like we have any questions in the chat bar, and so we're going to presume that there are no questions to be asked right now, but certainly you know how to reach us or your program specialist, and if there are questions about the information that was shared today, we would be happy to answer those questions. Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.